Shabbat Shalom, everyone. A truth many of us already assumed, but now should be plainly understood by all, was finally revealed at the last January 6th hearing in the United States. And our friends in America are now having a moment of self-reckoning. Now it is time for the Jewish people to say once again the thing we always say when this happens. We are the oldest living civilization in the world. We consider our mere existence in the face of atrocity after atrocity that has befallen our people century after century nothing short of a miracle of God. In the story of world civilization, the Jews have always stood apart from the common local culture. We are humanity's ever-present counterculture. Since we were exiled first from our homeland 2,500 years ago, Jews have migrated to all corners of the earth, and throughout those thousands of years we occasionally found some modicum of acceptance so that we could support and celebrate our host land that so many of us simply call home. But as much as we might think we're accepted, we're not. An anti-Semite doesn't care if just your father is Jewish or just your Zaidi, or how often you go to synagogue. All Jews, rich and poor, religious and secular, all of us are humanity's canaries in the coal mine. We can smell it happening first. Sometimes it's because we're seen as the capitalists against communist Russia. Sometimes we were the dirty degenerates for the Nazis. This time, in 2022, for the white nationalist neo-Nazis, we are targeted because the popular trope says that we are controlling the media, Hollywood, banks, and space lasers. And because many of our Jewish families have been in North America long enough and appear white enough to have had opportunities to make ourselves a wealthier than average demographic, we get dismissed out of hand, both by right and left, as we sound the alarm of anti-Semitism because we are viewed as pretend victims. All the poor Jews who haven't had a good opportunity to use their good dishes for the last 2.5 years, they're clearly suffering terribly. So it starts with anti-Semitism because anti-Semitism is easy. But then it isn't too much longer before other identifiable groups of people become targets. LGBTQ people, black people, Hispanic people, indigenous peoples, Middle Eastern people, Asian people. Any identifiable group that a super wealthy, egomaniacal grifter can point to and say, look, my beautiful, special, very smart mainstream culture people, you are suffering terribly because insert grievance here. And there are the people to blame for all of your problems. It's their fault. Hispanic rapists, black rioters, Muslim terrorists, trans pedophiles, China virus, Jewish cabal. It's all a tool wielded by would-be tyrants throughout history, and the Jewish people are very familiar with it. We ritually reflect on it each year at the Passover Seder when we recite the words Shelo echad bilvad amad aleinu lechalotenu ela shebechol dor vador omdim aleinu lechalotenu ve'akadosh baruch hu matzilenu miadam. For not only one enemy has risen against us to annihilate us, but in every generation there are those who rise against us to annihilate us. But the Holy One, blessed be He, saves us from their hands. Sometimes not as thoroughly as others. Donald Trump used this tool knowingly and with purpose right from the very beginning of the escalator that launched his campaign. It began the way it always begins, by changing the way people talk, changing the rules of what is allowed to be considered legitimate public discourse, and chalking it up to political outsiderism. Folks were taught that all the little racist, bigoted, xenophobic thoughts they had in their heads but weren't allowed to say were suddenly allowed to say it loudly and proudly. Like-minded others were gathered, and they were encouraged to say it out loud more and more because it felt good and validating. And slowly but surely, the Trump movement continued to push political discourse towards the radical fringe, further indoctrinating followers with doublespeak, half-truths, and outright lies, so as to erode his followers' sense of reality, all the while establishing himself as a pseudo-deity. This is what all cults do. Trump engineered a cult mentality among his followers, together with a cult culture of aggression, grievance, and guns. Now, this is the part that is most important for the Jewish community. Trump himself never specifically targeted the Jews. He didn't need to. The anti-Semitism was already there, latent in mainstream American culture, that needed no more than the occasional dog whistle. Trump was free to charm many Jewish people with policies that were really important to us. He got the U.S. Embassy in Israel to be formally moved to Jerusalem, a symbolic acknowledgement that Jerusalem is Israel's capital city. We owe him the Abraham Accords, which has built the most promising beginning of a path to tolerance and perhaps even peace in the Middle East. Who could have possibly imagined? I say to all my Republican Jewish friends, a bad person can do good things, especially when he wants something in return from you. This is not about your politics or the policies you support. It's about one man who used you for his own personal gain, manipulated you, all the while stoking the fires of an alt-right resurgence through carefully placed dog whistles and whistlers, so that he could purposely foment and weaponize what is now the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, and the QAnoners. He did it because that was his only path to power. And with it, he could overthrow the American government and rule as the first American king. The wisest of people can still fall for a simple deception because they're not looking for one. Be deceived no longer, and reconnect with all Jews everywhere, left, right, and center. This is our God-given job, to tell the world what never again means. Because we've got the longest history of experience with it. And this time, it's not so different than any time before. From the tyrants of ancient Greece and Rome, Attila the Hun, Ivan the Terrible, Mao Zedong, Kim Il-sung, Joseph Stalin, Idi Amin, Muammar Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, Benito Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, Donald J. Trump. The racial memory of the Jewish people remembers them all. This is what it looks like. This is how they do it every time, keeping in mind that while there are a lot of rabid anti-Semites on this list, this is not a list of anti-Semites. Trump, despite his casual anti-Semitism, I don't think is actually an anti-Semite. This is a list of Machiavellian utilitarians, people who are not beholden to any personal ideology other than the one that helps them win at any cost. It just happens that some of them, like Hitler, were also actual anti-Semites. Now America needs to take stock. It must notice and recognize the implications of the fact that so many of the things that so many of them believed so forcefully were all lies and deliberate manipulations. We shouldn't get angry with them. We should pity them. To our white, straight, Christian friends, you are now experiencing what it actually feels like to be legitimately victimized. Remember what you were told and by whom. There was never a war on Christmas. This was done to stoke fear and convince a Christian majority that their religion was under attack. There was also no legitimate justification for private citizens to have legal access to a weapon designed for mass murder. Your Second Amendment doesn't mean what you think it means. Read it again, all of it, carefully, and have a look at the rest of them while you're at it. Understand them and their very crucial exceptions and limitations. What Trump has been doing for a mere 7 years, the NRA has been doing a lot longer. You're right that freedom isn't free, but this has little to do with the military and everything to do with tolerance. Trust accredited professionals and legitimate science and ignore the crude Sharpie drawing on the map. Poor Dr. Fauci. Remember what was and still is being done to a guy that did nothing except his job. COVID is real. Vaccines work. Masks were necessary, and in many circumstances still are. Immigration, legal or not, is not destroying America. That's not a thing that's happening. Furthermore, you're all immigrants except for the indigenous communities. Get over it and pay your respects to Lady Liberty. Critical race theory is valid, and American children need to be taught about their country's failures as well as its successes. That's how we learn from history and build a more fair and promising future for all peoples. Socialized medicine is not the same thing as socialism. It's an imperfect solution, but it prevents a citizen from dying because they couldn't afford a necessary procedure or medication. Just about every other first world country has come to the same realization. Now it's America's turn. American exceptionalism is at an end. America is not immune from the same political shenanigans that happen in those shithole countries. It won't be easy, but if you can see it, you can fix it. Trump and his knowing enablers deserve universal condemnation for what their grift has done to America, to the world, and very importantly, to all those he purposefully manipulated to feed the America-sized maelstrom that is Donald Trump's ego. The world can take it from all the Jews that next time, and there will be a next time, whether it is in 10, 20, or 100 years, or please God, another 1,000 years from now, when everyone has forgotten again about how all this works, as humanity usually does. With God's help, the Jewish people will be there to do our job again, remind them, teach them from our long experience, and fulfill our eternal responsibility to be a light unto nations, because that's what the light has always been for. You're welcome. I'm Cantor Jeremy Burko. Shabbat Shalom.